Now that the dust has settled on the 2024 NFL Draft, we're going division by division, team by team, 2024 NFL Draft and offseason grades, really. Where do these teams stand now, starting in the NFC East right now?
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look at the NFL on the field and in the front office with elite breakdowns to next-level analysis and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen in the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We love our everydayers, and we love it. We really appreciate it. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcast. Drop a question for our Wednesday mailbag on YouTube as well, or on Twitter at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Today's episode of P&W is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and my competitive side is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play. Dallas Cowboys up first. We're going alphabetical. We're going east to west, starting in the NFC, Matt. So those Dallas Cowboys probably, and this is from analysts, from us from afar, from Cowboys fans themselves, some friends that I have that have the misfortune of being Dallas Cowboys fans. We love to hate on them over here in California. A boring offseason. They're like the internet meme, the poking the Cowboys with the stick. Do something. They brought back Zeke Elliott, and they just kind of they traded down a few spots in the NFL draft, right? And got an offensive tackle. And they addressed their offensive line. I like some of the things they did in the draft, but interesting offseason for the Cowboys. They feel so close. They need to do that one big thing, and they kind of just said, "No, we're cool. We're going to roll back and do it again, and just add a couple pieces here."
Yeah, so the Cowboys are the first of our series here, and we'll eventually meander our way through 32 teams and 8 divisions. And they might be the most boring to talk about of all 32. We're leading off with the opposite of leading off with a bang. But I will say, with this team, other shoes will be dropping. And what I mean by that is paying Micah Parsons, CeeDee Lamb, Dak Prescott, who has really no incentive to sign a contract at all. He can just sit back and become a free agent. But that's where their money and resources are going to go. So you need to look at it through that lens. Now, they have as you mentioned, very little free agency stuff to talk about. Zeke Elliott and Rico Dowdle battling it out for the top running back spot. That's what we're going to discuss here. But I do want to stress the O-line. They moved down in round 1, and with the pick they got to move down, they picked up Cooper Beebe in the 3rd round. So they ended up with Tyler Guyton as their 1st round pick, Cooper Beebe as their 3rd. Both the players go ahead.
Their best move, their best pick, their best move of the offseason, right? Was like that, just that by itself. Cooper Beebe, round 3, extra free player, starting interior offensive lineman in the NFL, A+ move, just that by itself.
I 100% agree. So really nerding out and looking at their best 5 offensive linemen, I think how they'll handle it is Zach Martin, of course, will be the right guard. I think they're going to keep Tyler Smith at left guard, and frankly, I think he's a superstar. I think Steele will stay at right tackle, and Guyton will move from right tackle to left tackle, which isn't something that happens seamlessly. And Beebe's going to move from guard to center, which also fits him. He's super smart, super short arms. So I think both those rookies could do it. But you're asking 2 rookies to play new positions so your other 3 can stay in their best positions. And I don't know 100% that's how it'll go, but there could be some growing pains there. But that best 5, if it works out, seems pretty strong.
And I like addressing the offensive line. It's something that was one of the best in the NFL and has been addressed more recently. Tyler Smith in 2022, now with a couple more draft picks, trying to get it back to the area that they were. And I think Cooper Beebe is the most likely to be able to play early in his career. I'm not so sure about Tyler Guyton and just throwing him in there at left tackle, switching sides from his college. And, he was raw already. I'm not as big on the Guyton pick as I am on the Beebe pick. First of all, they're, quite a ways apart in where they were drafted. And I don't think there was a huge difference in Guyton and guys that went around later at the end of round 2 in, Suamataia and Rosengarten. Blake Fisher was a second round guy. I think those were similar tiered players, at least for me. And I know, the consensus had Tyler Guyton, higher, and maybe he's taller. That's really the big thing that he's got on any of those guys. I don't know if that's enough by itself, because he's still a little bit raw. So we'll see. I would guess that Tyler Guyton probably starts on the bench. I don't know if he wins that spot. And then Cooper Beebe eventually slides around, maybe from left guard to center once Guyton is ready to start. I don't know if he's ready to start right now, and that might be a lot to ask for. It's a lot to ask for a rookie tackle anyway. But for a really raw player, it might be too much to ask. And so we'll see how that ends up going. But really just the overall vibe of this offseason, and you started to lay it out there with the big contracts and the players. I feel like Jerry Jones made these moves for the future on the offensive line, and he's kind of looking at his roster and Dak and these superstars and saying, this should be enough. So show me, and then we'll figure out if we need to make big moves next offseason.
Could be. I mean, that doesn't sound like crazy talk to me at all, because sitting here looking at our lad's depth chart with Beebe at center and Guyton at left tackle, it looks swell. But I know I do like Guyton, I think, more than you do, not by leaps and bounds, but there is room for error there, where we're reading things in camp where Tyler Smith has to kick out the left tackle, and then who's the guard? Maybe Beebe moves. There's definitely room for error there.
Right. And it wouldn't be necessarily a bad thing as long as Guyton gets there and he could start in year 2. That'd be a fine thing. Swing tackle year 1, Beebe plays guard, then Beebe kicks inside, and everyone kind of moves over one spot to the right. And Tyler Guyton in year 2 becomes a starter, which would not be terrible at all. But again, that doesn't help you this year in reaching where the Cowboys want to be, and they haven't been for 30 years. Right. And that's the goal here. And they didn't do much to help that now. I think they think that they have enough, and we could see if it's not enough, then we'll see big changes next year, and they'll have a lot of money that they're not paying a quarterback to try to figure that out.
I wish Tyron Smith was still there on a 1-year deal,
Yeah.
Then everything would fall into place, I do like the Marshawn Nealon pick. I didn't understand the hype about him. We talked about that pre-draft, but I think he's going to kick inside next to Odighi Zuwa on passing downs, and gives them a pretty formidable front four with Lawrence and Parsons.
Yeah, I think they got 3 second-rounders. Guyton, Nealon, and Beebe. They would kind of all be similar graded, and they got 3 of them. One right where he should have been, Marshawn Nealon in the second round. You hope he can. I think he's a little tight in the hips. That's the one thing I don't like about him, is I don't know if he'll get to where you would want him to be as a pass rusher, just because he doesn't have a looseness to turn the corner. But love the way he plays. And even though, he bull rushes all day long, high energy player, lots of effort, and motor is such a big deal in the NFL for defensive ends. And so it's not going to be a lack of effort why he fails. I think biomechanically might not just be able to turn the corner. It doesn't have those swivel hips, but we'll see how that turns out. And potentially 3 starters there in round 1, 2, and 3, which is what you're trying to do. And then they came back with some guys who could play some special teams, some backups that could potentially be starters or play rotational roles. Maris Lufau, the Notre Dame linebacker, again, another player who plays a certain way. So I do like that, especially with Nealon, Beebe, and Lufau. They all play with their hair on fire. Kalen Carson, I think more of a nickel corner, which is important in this league. To get a guy like him in the 5th round is, I think, a nice pick. And then some late round guys that, frankly, I don't know a ton about. Ryan Flournoy, Southeast Missouri State wide receiver. Did not do a lot of tape work on Southeast Missouri State. Matt, I don't know if you did. Then Nathan Thomas, Louisiana tackle, and another defensive tackle there, or another offensive tackle in the 7th, and then a defensive tackle in the 7th as well, Justin Rogers out of Auburn. What's your overall grade for this draft class?
C+. I mean, there's not a lot of difference makers to your point. I do think Lufau could be a starting linebacker at some point, and Carson could be a starting slot. So maybe you do get contributors, but I don't see difference makers.
I think you're right. Yeah. The 2 offensive linemen are really the key to me. And if you got 2 starting offensive linemen, and then I think, this has to be a B draft, because that can't ever be a bad thing. So Tyler Guyton, starting left tackle, doesn't have to be year 1. Then it's a good draft. So I'm going to go B- on the draft.
Okay. I grade harsh. I just think everybody gives Bs, and I think that's too easy.
It's a little too easy. And to be honest, when we go through this, I might look back and be like, yeah, it's more of a C draft, not a B.
Yeah.
But I do think we need to be more harsh on these drafts.
Everybody just give that a B. I'll get generous, give them a B plus. So I'll be harsh, give them a B minus.
What's funny is a lot of people get mad. They're like, oh, you can't grade a draft. How do you know this is a bad draft?
Of course.
This team knows better than you do. If you go back and grade past drafts, the grades are way lower because that's just the reality.
Oh, right. That's what I mean. Right.
Half these
players. A draft happens like once a year.
Right. But we give
we hand them out left and right. Yeah. Because everything looks good this time of year. It's the beauty of the NFL.
Plus, you're right. You talked me into it. Let's be realistic here. C+ draft from the Dallas Cowboys. Let's see if they're able to pull out multiple starters in this class. Next, we've got the New York Giants. Did they do enough to take their next step to try to compete with the rest of the teams in this division? It's a good division. It could be even better with some of these teams. Commanders trying to catch up to the Cowboys and the Eagles next. This episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. It's winner take all in the NBA and NHL playoffs, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's right, $150 to play with at FanDuel if you win that first $5 bet. Bet on spreads, money lines, player props, a whole bunch more. You don't want to bet on the NBA or the NHL? Well, Major League Baseball's going every day this summer. How about NFL draft? NFL draft is over. How about NFL futures at FanDuel? If you want to stick with the NFL, as I think a lot of our listeners might. Rookies of the year, offensive, defensive rookies of the year. Who's going to win the next Super Bowl? You can find all of it at FanDuel. And of course, those playoff games. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. The New York Giants. How do we feel about the New York Giants draft haul, Matt? They had an early pick. They've had a lot of early picks. And I think we know the team will go as the quarterback goes. And they did not select the quarterback at pick number 6. They did go best player available on consensus boards. That was Malik Nabers, the LSU wide receiver. Came back with Tyler Nubin in round 2. Safety out of Minnesota, Andrew Phillips, a nickel corner out of Kentucky. Theo Johnson, love this pick in round 4. Penn State tight end. He's got athleticism. He's got size. And he could be a true starting Y tight end, maybe sooner rather than later, depending on what happens there on the rest of the roster at that position. Tyrone Tracy, good receiving running back out of Purdue. And Darius Masau, UCLA linebacker in round 6. So a small class, only 6 picks that is headlined by Malik Nabers, the potential superstar wide receiver out of LSU. If I'm not mistaken, Matt, you just drafted in a dynasty league.
I did. My first rookie pick of the whole season. It was I had the 4th pick overall in a dynasty league and super flex, and I took Nabers at 4. I was very happy to have the 4th pick. It went Caleb Williams, Marvin, and then I knew I was going to get Daniels or Nabers, and I was happy with either. Stood pat 4, grabbed Nabers, and I'm quite happy about it. I like this draft because I can see what their thoughts are with every pick. I don't really care about Masau, the linebacker. He's going to be a special teamer, but especially the top 5. Like, the Giants would have been great if they did more quarterback, of course. But people seem to be higher on Drew Lock than I am. I mean, namely Pete Carroll, and the Giants went out and grabbed him immediately. And they definitely kicked the tires on rookies. Didn't make that happen, but I really like what they did on the O-line, grabbing guys like Illuminor and Runyon, and maybe Neal's no longer a starter, but I think the O-line's finally complete. And I'm not saying, the Penn State kid, Theo Johnson's going to be a direct replacement for Waller, or Tyrone Tracy's going to be a direct replacement for Barkley, but they both have a lot of ability, and finally they have a #1 wide receiver. So I commend what they did with the offense outside of quarterback for the offseason.
Well, look, if you're not going to change quarterback, at least make his life easier. And Malik Nabers can do that. Because you look at the rest of this receiving group, Darren Waller aside, I mean, Jalen Hyatt, who's a 3rd round, one-dimensional speedster last year. Wan'Dale Robinson's not being able to get his career quite off the ground as a 2nd round pick, who was frankly drafted a little bit too high in 2022. You got Isaiah McKenzie. You got Darius Slayton that's still around over there. Hard to believe. Isaiah Hodgins. Miles Boykin, you know what I mean? The Gunnar Olszewski is there. It's still not a scary group, even though they added a guy with superstar talent at the top. So it's something that they had to do and get more dynamic offensively. And Brian Daboll talked about it after the draft. He's like, we need more speed on this football team.
Yeah, I mean, at least they have one guy now that can create mismatch problems, you know, I mean, and dictate coverages and get a layup on 3rd and 5 with a quick slant and, you know, make life a little easier. And I like their 2 pickups on defense too, especially if you throw Brian Burns in the mix, because that cost them a draft pick. And that front is pretty nasty now with Dexter Lawrence and Thibodeau and Ojulari and Burns. But Phillips was one of my favorite corners, and Newbin, I think, is a pretty direct replacement for Xavier McKinney, which was a big loss.
Right. Yeah. Gets his hands on a lot of footballs. So if you get a starting safety, you get a starting corner, maybe a nickel corner outside. We'll see where Andrew Phillips ends up landing there as far as what position he plays. I like him more as a nickel guy, the way he plays and his size. But still, that's, you know, a starting caliber position. And then even a high-end backup in Theo Johnson at tight end, who could potentially be a starter, I think, as well. It's a pretty good draft, and it's a good start. And, you know, Tyrone Tracy, you have a clear path. You know exactly what he is and how to utilize this is a very late 5th round guy too at running back, and that's where you find value at that position. Someone who can be a rotational receiving type of a back, and who knows, maybe even more for the Giants there out of the backfield. So it's a good draft. I like it. It's a solid B draft.
Yeah, I was going to B too. Really, I know we just said we're not going to give Bs, but
Malik Neighbors needs to be a superstar, and then this may, you know, if you have 4 starters, all of a sudden this does become an A draft.
Yeah, I am going to call it a B again, but we said we're going to avoid just giving everything a B. But this is solid. I see their plan. It's not earth-shattering, but one player could be. Who knows? But I bet in your way of viewing things, this front office never would have used the 3rd pick in the draft on Saquon Barkley. Like, I think they're just like going to committee running back to no end and just deal with big problems. You know what I mean? Which is your style, which makes all the sense in the world for this team.
As they should. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I, if you don't believe in the quarterback, don't force it. Take the best player available, which they did. So I like that.
And maybe they couldn't get the 3 for May or whatever, you know.
Right. And so even though I don't love what they have going on at quarterback, I think that was not necessarily an on the clock pick 6 problem. I think it's been a different problem for other years and other drafts and other free agencies. And so that's a separate issue that we're not necessarily grading right now, that they should have addressed with quarterback. But as far as their draft and their picks there, you know, I can't say they should have gone another direction.
Yeah, I hear you there.
Pick 22 for as much wheeling and dealing as the Eagles do, and Howie Roseman gets a lot of credit, as he should, for the roster he's put together there. They didn't move at all. They sat at 22, got the best corner in the draft, and Quinyon Mitchell did the Philadelphia Eagles out of Toledo. Came back, moved up for Cooper DeJean out of Iowa, who I think projects inside for them. And I think the league told us by him going with the 8th pick in round 2 and not in round 1 that he's probably an interior player, not an outside cornerback for at least everybody, and probably for the Philadelphia Eagles. And clearly, and we talked about this right after the draft, and we named this as one of our favorite draft classes, Matt, is that Vic Fangio came in and said, this is not going to work in the defensive backfield. And so they did work, and they put 2 high-end draft picks towards it. And then kind of went fishing a little bit after that. Jalix Hunt in round 3, pick 31 in round 3. Long edge guy. I don't think he's going to see the field anytime soon. And you're just hoping, you know, all those arms and legs and athleticism eventually works itself into a stand-up pass rusher in the NFL. Didn't really look like he knew what he was doing in college, but has a ton of athletic talent. And you're just, that is a lottery ticket if I've ever seen one there, and maybe a little too rich in round 3. Will Shipley, running back out of Clemson, round 4. Aeneas Smith, Texas A&M receiver, return guy. Jeremiah Trotter, interior linebacker out of Clemson in round 5. Came back in round 5. Trevor Keegan, Michigan guard. Johnny Wilson, oversized wide receiver in round 6 that they said is going to stay at wide receiver, which I hate because I think he's a tight end in the NFL. And then Dylan McMahon, really athletic guard center out of NC State in round 6. Another pick I like with those athletic traits. I love just drafting those guys, get them in a weight room for a while, see if you have it worked a long time ago in round 6, getting a guy who was super athletic, maybe undersized interior offensive lineman, became a Hall of Famer for you. So why not try it again with Dylan McMahon here? Not to put that on the young man.
Yeah. And so I like when good teams, and we'll get to like the Lions down the road, attack a need heavy, and Mitchell and DeJean are very different, but you still have Slay, you still have Maddox. I'm not sure if Bradbury will be a cap cut or what they'll do with him, but DeJean might even just take over at one of the safety spots. And you got Gardner Johnson. So you got a lot of pieces in the secondary. I would think Vic Fangio will be able to put that together just fine. I thought Trotter was an overrated player, but they got him where they should. Not a high upside guy. I'm fans of legacy picks. Part of that's my Steeler blood, but put him next to Dean or Devin White, who are just like speedballs at the linebacker position. Maybe Trotter can get them aligned right and do that kind of thing for them. I'm not a big Jalen Hunt fan. We kind of laughed at him before the draft, but they've had success. I mean, they have Bryce Huff. They've had success with Hassan Reddick. It's a well-coached team. I would think they could turn a speedball off the edge into an impact player on 3rd and 8. The line doesn't seem like much, but give that line coach Dylan McMahon and Trevor Keegan, and I bet 3 years from now, we'll know one of those two names. He'll turn one of those dudes into a player, Just give me multiple Clay and we'll go from there. And really, their third receiver is a little strange right now, but I think Johnny Wilson is a receiver, but he couldn't be any different than Aeneas Smith. And I like both those guys a ton.
And I like
and
that.
They do,
yeah,
totally different. Like you walk in the room, like they don't play the same position. They don't even play the same sport. And they still have Devontae Parker, who we could laugh at, but if that's your third guy, those three are fighting for the third spot with Paris Campbell behind Brown and Devontae Smith. You're in good shape. You're in good shape. I like this roster. Barkley's on there now. I mean, they got a pretty good group.
Next, we'll put a letter grade on the Philadelphia Eagles draft, and then we'll talk Washington Commanders, who, spoiler, is one of my favorite drafts in the entire NFL in 2024. Next. This episode of Peacock and Williamson brought to you by Monopoly Go. All right, it's game off. Got to pause here. Talk a little bit more about Monopoly Go. And I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about that, but there's so much good stuff in this game. You can team up with your friends, time tournaments where you work together, build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you can unlock, like unique stickers you can trade with friends, complete albums, big prizes there, cool new playing pieces. And come on, this is Monopoly. It's all about the playing piece. And hilarious emojis, taunting your friends. And by the way, maybe even more fun than teaming up with your friends is destroying your friends, charging them rent on all the iconic Monopoly properties. You can heist their vaults and climb up the leaderboards as you push them down the leaderboards. Always new timed events to help you win big. Always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench. Go download it now, free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. So Philadelphia Eagles draft. I mean, I love what they did in round 1 and round 2. Some curious stuff in the middle, but I kind of like the mix of, low floor, high upside, but then some higher floor, lower upside guys, kind of mitigating risk, and got some role players in there as well as some lottery tickets. So thought that was fascinating. A lot of moving up and down, as Howie Roseman always does. And in the end, I think they had a really nice draft here, and this is another B for me.
For the Eagles. I'm going to give them a B plus just because of what they did to set up the draft. Corner was their biggest need, and they addressed it heavily. The Eagles were my favorite of the three we discussed so far. So I'm giving them a B plus.
I was thinking B plus for them. I went B just because it wasn't their fault that everybody let Quinyon Mitchell fall to them at 22. So they just didn't screw up the pick once they got there. They didn't pull everybody else, but they didn't move up, which a lot of people thought they might, and then they saved it and moved up in the second round. So yeah, master stroke there, but we'll see. Like, I'm looking at this team, I see only 2 starters.
Yeah, but at a big position. So no, I hear what you're saying. I mean, that's I only see 2 starters max. Yeah.
Washington Commanders, new regime. This is so important, setting the tone for this franchise. Is this coach, is this GM going to stick around for a long time? New ownership. Did they get things right? And they started with a bang with a quarterback just to make the level of guilt, the difficulty even higher for them. And that wasn't even my favorite pick of this draft class, not even close, even though I do like Jaden Daniels. High variance player potentially in the NFL. We'll see how that ends up working out. Cliff Kingsbury, do they have the right coach player combination here? Jaden Daniels, LSU quarterback, number 2 overall in this draft, but this is where they really started to cook, I think, Matt, in round 2. They had 3 second-round picks due to various trades and trading off some old players. And look, we have to give them some credit for utilizing the picks, even though a past regime got them the picks anyway.
Sure.
But Johnny Newton, round 2, one of my favorite picks in the entire draft. Thought he was a first-round guy all day. You get a pass-rushing defensive lineman there, one of the top 2 defensive tackles in this class. They got him early in round 2. I thought that was a steal. You get a cornerstone player. By the way, I think all or maybe all but one of all of their draft picks were all captains. Like these are
really?
all players where you're like, oh man, the way this guy plays, I love it. Mike Sanders still one of those, probably more of a nickel corner out of Michigan, but he's going to be a player that plays a long time in the NFL. Ben Sims, it's kind of similar on the offensive side of the ball. He can block, he can catch. He tested really well. I'm sure Adam Peters saw some shades of George Kittle there, do it all sort of a player, tight end out of Kansas State to finish up round 2. Brandon Coleman, starting caliber offensive lineman, probably a guard in the NFL out of TCU in round 3. You come back with Luke McCaffrey. That's probably my least favorite pick, even though I like Luke McCaffrey's game. But, round 3, a little early for a guy who hasn't played a lot of wide receiver and maybe doesn't have a huge amount of upside, but should probably be able to, come in and get himself open on third downs as a third, fourth wide receiver, play a little special teams. You got Jordan McGee out of Temple, linebacker player I really like to get in round 5. You got Dominique Hampton, Washington safety, and Javonte Jean-Baptiste, an edge rusher from Notre Dame in round 7 to finish it off. So a big draft class, an important draft class. And obviously when we regrade this in 3 years, it's all about the quarterback. But I like a lot of the other things they did, which is why this is an A draft for me.
Okay. One thing stuck with me that I didn't know, you mentioned the team captain thing, and it made me go back and just look at some of their other offseason moves. This team needs, to power wash, we need to scrub all the dirt and grime out of every crevice of the building and organization. So that captain thing does ring true with me, especially when you mix it with going out and bringing in Bobby Wagner and Zach Ertz and Austin Eckler and Frankie Louvu. And, a couple of those dudes are well past their prime, but they've won games and they're professionals, Ertz and Eckler and Wagner in particular. And then you get a Biotish and a Louvu who are high character, tough guys too, that are more in their prime. But I'll be honest, I think probably the Monday after the draft, we both picked some of our favorites, and Washington definitely came up for both of us. But I have more mixed feelings about this draft now than I did then. And here's my biggest reasons is I love the Newton pick. I love the Sainristil pick because I just think they were value. They were 2 of my favorite players. I think any team in the league would love to have them. I think Newton was just too good to be true at 36 overall. And maybe they move Allen or Payne for a pick. I mean, who knows? But they have an abundance of riches at defensive tackle. But here's my complaints, and one of them's a small one. I like May more than Daniels. So, okay, I understand why most of the world disagrees with me, but I like May more than Daniels. I would have just liked more O-line help. Brandon Coleman, to me, is an interesting player. He might be a guard. He might be a tackle, basketball background, but he's probably not plug and play. And Sanat's fine. McCaffrey's fine. They were both earlier than I would have picked them, though. I mean, a second-round pick on a so-so tight end and a third-round pick on a slot only. He was a quarterback 2 years ago. I like Jordan McGee out of Temple, tough guy, and the last 2 I don't have strong feelings about at all. But I would have liked more O-line.
I can see that. Trying to build the nest around your quarterback. They did draft a tight end who can block and catch.
Yeah.
And they do have some good receivers there already, which is helpful for a young quarterback. Veteran guys. Jahan Dotson's now been in the league for a couple of years. Terry McLaurin, knows how to play and knows how to be the main target in a passing game. Luke McCaffrey, probably more of a slot number 3 type there. He develops early, and we'll see. You got Diami Brown, more downfield guy, and so Zacchaeus. They got some players there, but if there's a place where you're like, you did your quarterback dirty, it'd be the offensive line. But there was also not the right place to. Well, I do take that back. I mentioned when we were talking about the Cowboys and who was there on the offensive line in round 2, being maybe not that far off from Guyton. Was there a starting caliber tackle they could have taken in round 2 instead of a tight end or instead of a nickel corner? I could see that being a minor quibble here.
Position value.
Especially if the offensive line is not great for your rookie quarterback. Protect him at all costs. maybe they thought, well, we're leaning heavy into the I can't remember what I heard Adam Peters talking about it. The commander, these are the commander guys. Every team has their little thing, and they put a sticker next to a guy on the draft board, and they have their guys, whatever their commander captains that they were looking for. Was that more important to set the tone for this whole thing this offseason than maybe a high upside offensive lineman in round 2? I think for them, they probably said, yeah, that's more important.
I get it. And Rome was not built in a day, and this is going to be a 3-year project. So I can nitpick like crazy, but they didn't have the cards in their hands to address anything. But I'm going to pick one more small nit because they did move on from Young and Sweat. Sweat looks like somebody that'll be missed, but they got a good pick from him. I don't think Young is, worth investing in at this point. But my hunch is when we see 1 million mock drafts next year leading up to the 2025 draft, everyone's going to either have a tackle or an edge rusher going to Washington. And those are positions that are hard to find.
Yeah, you have to draft those early. So every mock draft is going to have an edge rusher and offensive tackle for Washington. And I'm sure whatever Mel Kiper's mock has that for them. When the day after 2025 mock
should be.
Yeah, I'm sure that's what it is. And I haven't looked at any of those yet. But you're probably right. And they've got too many defensive tackles now too. So, Jonathan Allen, trade deadline, could they keep that thing rolling where they're trading away veteran players? And
there'd be a big market for him. I mean, he's a great player, and then maybe they add all kinds of stuff, and then they totally rebuilt the team a year from now. But it's going to take a couple years. So I give them a B. I give them a B. I give them an A-, but I give them a B.
This is the leadoff hitter in the first inning, and I think they did hit a home run, but the game's not over.
I think they hit a double, and they got a lot more work to do to get him home.
That is the NFC East. What do you guys think? Do you agree with Williamson and I on these draft classes? We're kind of seeing eye to eye on most of these things. I liked Washington a little bit more. I think he liked the Giants a little bit more than I did. Let us know what you think at BD Peacock, at Williamson NFL. Drop a comment or a question on YouTube. Make sure you subscribed up there. Matt and I back tomorrow with another division post-draft right here. Peacock and Williamson.